Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today, we're very excited to welcome for the first time Dr. Dana Lambert, CEO of Andira Pharmaceuticals, here to talk a little bit about what they're doing as a company perspective, as well as talk about the biopharmaceutical elements of cannabinoids and the unmet needs in medicine from a cannabis perspective. If you're out there and you want to join the conversation, always a good recommendation. You can put any comments or questions you have in the chat, and we'll try to answer them as we go along. Always a great way to kind of connect directly to experts, to people who are directly in the field, who have questions specifically. So good reminder out there as well. I see Stevie as well in the comments. Great to see you. With all that said, Dana, thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Would love to start with sort of your background because you're new. It's your first time. Would love to kind of get a sense of, what brought you to the space and a little bit more color, I think, on Andira altogether.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks, Mackenzie, so much for having me. It's great to be on the AlphaNooner. So in terms of my background, I started my career as a hospital pharmacist. So I was treating very, very sick patients in hospitals based in Canada. And it just became really clear to me that the medicines that we use in our hospitals weren't always ideal. And so I was treating very, very sick patients with deadly infections and cancer patients. And I got really inspired by a lot of research that was starting to come to the surface on how cannabinoids might be useful in addressing things like drug-resistant infections in hospitals and cancer. So I actually left clinical practice altogether, and I went back to the University of BC, based in Vancouver, Canada, and did a doctorate degree in pharmaceutical sciences. Not because I'm an academic. I actually went back to engage in drug discovery. And in doing so, ended up spinning off Andira Pharmaceuticals 9 years ago today.
Oh, almost 10 years coming up. That's a big anniversary. So that's fantastic. And I think just very interesting. What year was sort of the first time that cannabinoids kind of hit your radar? Because I think it's really changed in terms of how people have viewed cannabis as a medicine, across a range of uses. But would love to hear sort of, what year roughly that was around. I guess 9 years ago. That makes sense.
Well, no, a lot more than 9 years ago, actually. So back in the day when I was doing my training, when I was in pharmacy school, we actually got educated about the endocannabinoid system. So the receptors and things in our body that respond to cannabinoids. And they were also talking about how to make new drugs that could act on the endocannabinoid system. So that would have been back in 2008. So I think that's when the seeds first got planted that, hey, there's this really powerful system and there's these medicines that can be found in the cannabis plant that act on the system. And it sort of, planted the seed that, hey, that there could be a lot of potential here. But being, a dedicated pharmacist, I wanted to go out and help people firsthand in hospitals. So I did that, and I only lasted about 2 years because I was so taken aback by the unmet needs.
Yes, I think that's probably true in the US as well as it is in Canada and across the world. So again, great ways to kind of find new tools, new ways to get treatments, and great to, I guess, jump in to pretty early days in the cannabis side of things, 20 years ago, roughly. So that's fantastic. Well, so then would love to hear kind of how it all folds over into Andira, kind of maybe even giving people kind of a high level view of what you're focusing on more specifically, there.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to talk about the journey and how we arrived here. But essentially today, I have a really bold claim, and that is Andira is actually using cannabinoids to solve antimicrobial resistance and cancer. And we've done that over 9 years of very in-depth pharmaceutical research and development. So we currently have 2 programs at the company. Our infection control program is advancing a technology that we call Sylvanex. So it's a synergistic combination of silver, which is a standard of care infection control agent used around the world. It's a synergistic combination of silver with 2 cannabinoids in particular. So with Silvanex, we're developing antimicrobial wound dressings for hospital infection control to help prevent things like MRSA and other resistant infections. And we're also developing Silvanex in a topical drug that is intended to prevent surgical site infections in patients in hospitals that have just undergone a surgery.
Very interesting. So very different, I think, from, I mean, ultimately, again, targeting that medical element for people, but very different from what most people who maybe think of cannabis or medicine would think of, where you are kind of taking it for the more traditional effects of cannabis. It's very set apart. Again, I'm guessing that there are no, psychoactive elements of the Silvanex, I think, ultimately, right? It's just sort of, again.
Yeah, that's right. And what we've really focused on at Andira is the individual cannabinoids on their own. So what can they do on their own to treat infectious disease? And then what can they do if individual ingredients are combined with standard of care agents? And it's really interesting because there's a lot of research that's been published on the antimicrobial actions of cannabinoids. And Andira has been in this field for a very long time. And what we've actually found is that cannabinoids can never actually be used as antibiotics, the same way that an antibiotic drug would be given to somebody as an oral dosage form or as an intravenous drug. Cannabinoids can never be used in that way, because as soon as they enter the body, so if you were to take cannabinoids through a liquid or a tincture, inhale, or if you were to administer it intravenously, as soon as they hit the bloodstream and the fluids inside our body, they are no longer effective as antimicrobials. So they do kill bacteria in science labs. So if you put them in a petri dish and you throw them on bacteria, they kill a certain family of bacteria, but not others. So on their own, if we're talking about drug development and using cannabinoids to address infectious disease, number one, they're only effective against one type of bacteria and not others. And number two, you could never use them the same way that we use traditional antibiotics, because as soon as they enter the body, they don't work anymore. So that's sort of what we uncovered over the past 9 years. But I can tell you that what we're doing with Silvanex is quite different. So it's only intended for external uses. So it can go onto wounds, the skin, and it can also be embedded into medical products and medical supplies, things like wound dressings, catheters, things in hospitals that are used routinely in order to help prevent infection.
Yep, that makes sense. So in terms of where it is in terms of the ability to use it, in terms of, having the idea, the concept, having the research and building it through, kind of where is Silvanex, in sort of that process?
Yeah, so Silvanex is actually, it's in the very late stages of preclinical development. So we've actually proven its antimicrobial efficacy. We've proven that it eradicates every major class of pathogen in healthcare settings. So it doesn't matter what type of infectious disease is encountered. It could be MRSA, another superbug called VRE. It could be multi-drug resistant E. coli, or it could be resistant fungus. It doesn't matter what it is. We've proven that Silvanex will eradicate it. Not just inhibit the growth a little bit like silver does currently, it actually eliminates the problem altogether. And we actually have a study going on right now that is demonstrating that bacteria cannot become resistant to Sylvanex.
Interesting. Why is that? Just, I mean, again, is there a reason or some way to explain how that works? So that's impressive, and that's, again, I think something that you'd really want, especially given there's so much resistance that's being built up in what is the word in what is the oral word that you take?
Oh, against antibiotics.
Antibiotics. Thank you so much. Antibiotic resistance. So is there anything that can kind of explain how that works? Because that's, again, really fantastic, and I think a big breakthrough ultimately.
Thank you. Well, and you're absolutely right, Mackenzie. Antibiotic resistance is a huge problem. The World Bank estimates it could cost up to $3 trillion in GDP by the year 2030. And the reason why we don't have a whole library of new antibiotics coming to the marketplace is that economically, they're not viable drug products. And when I say that, it's because when you have an antibiotic, it will only be used in the event that somebody gets an infection.
Yep.
And then when somebody gets an infection, if a doctor happens to prescribe your antibiotic, guess what? They're only getting, 7 pills or, very limited numbers. So the revenues that companies can generate from developing a new antibiotic are, in a sense, limited. They're capped.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason why we just don't have a lot of economic incentive for companies to develop new antibiotic drugs. And that's changing, by the way. Health organizations and governments around the world are actually offering more and more economic incentives and advantages for companies to develop new antibiotics. But that's sort of the background and the economic reason behind why we're in this problem. So Sylvanex is something that is not intended to be used only in the event somebody has an infection.
Yeah.
So Sylvanex is intended for all of the same antimicrobial and infection control purposes as silver currently, which is used every day in just about every hospital around the world for preventative purposes. Yeah, so we're now talking about a mainstream product that's not intended for treatment alone. It's intended for routine use in virtually every patient to protect them when they enter a healthcare setting. So the opportunity for Andira is actually massive.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I guess also from a patient perspective, I think great to not get an infection, obviously, as well. But again, it probably reduces the occurrence of, contributing to that resistance, because if more people are taking antibiotics, you're more likely to miss a dose and kind of ultimately create something that is resistant, to treatment, I guess on that end. So that's super interesting on that front as well. How does that sort of tie in? Because I know you mentioned earlier that you guys address more latitude of things, again, including things like cancer. Does that tie into basically the treatment and kind of, again, the preventative element for the antimicrobial treatment kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I want to address what we're doing for cancer treatment in a second, but I wanted to go back because you asked about, okay, Dana, why is it that you're saying today that Sylvanex can prevent resistance from happening? How does that work? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of in-depth science behind it, but to put it in everyday terms, there was a study that was done about 5 years ago on one of the cannabinoids that's in Sylvanex. It's cannabigerol, CBG. There was a study that was done on CBG alone. And they used 2 independent validated methods to measure how readily bacteria will become resistant to it. It's a validated test. It's routinely done in science. And what they found was that they couldn't actually detect any resistance emerging to CBG alone. And one of the reasons is that its mechanism of action involves disrupting the inner membrane. You don't need to know what that means, but basically any antimicrobial that can do that, it's been validated in scientific literature that antimicrobials that can do that are just less prone to having resistance emerge. So that's CBG alone.
Mm.
What Sylvanex does as a triple combination, so we have silver, CBG, and another non-intoxicating cannabinoid called CBC, cannabichromene. When you put them all together, what it accomplishes is a simultaneous disruption of the inner membrane and the outer membrane of microbes at the same time. So what that means in real terms is that, poof, you just annihilated any and all drug-resistant pathogens. So anytime you use a treatment in combination, there's also less likelihood of bacteria figuring out how to become resistant to it. So CBG on its own is extremely impressive in terms of no detectable resistance being able to emerge against it. But then when we bring in the triple combination and its unique novel synergistic mechanism of action, there is just no capacity of disease-causing bacteria to become resistant. And we're proving that right now as we speak, actually.
Fantastic. Yeah. So sort of that 1 + 2 = 3, that synergy element of kind of bringing those three things together to make something that really can tackle it across the board, which is great.
Well, to put real numbers on it.
Yeah, sure. Please.
If I love using real numbers based on our research. The synergy is actually of the magnitude of 1 + 1 + 1 = 1 million or greater.
Oh, gosh.
That's what we're talking about.
Okay, that's a big impact. All right, well, that's great. And then in terms of, I guess, yeah, so you're moving that along in development. You have the IP there, so that's again a really solid, part of the business. That's fantastic. I guess also I'll point people towards the end in terms of where they can learn more information. But for that specifically, is there any great place that you point people if they want more education to learn more, to kind of dig a little bit more into the science of it? Anywhere that you'd point them specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Come visit us at our website, andira.ca. We do have a science page there that talks briefly about some of the science behind what we're doing. So we made it as a resource for people to understand not only what we're doing in terms of product development, but also some of the science that underlies the company.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know we'll talk more about sort of what the company's working on, but I am curious in terms of when you're explaining this to investors, kind of people just in general, is it easy to kind of communicate the science? I think you've done a good job so far in terms of making it simple, but also having those hard numbers to understand. But is it something that when you bring it to people, they're kind of surprised again that cannabinoids can have this effect, can make such an impact, or is it you're talking to people who pretty much can understand it and pull it together?
Yeah, well, it is very exciting and it is relatively easy for people to understand, but there is this sort of wow factor, and some people question, oh my gosh, is this actually real? It definitely is real, and we follow industry leading scientific practices. All of our studies are validated, done at the University of BC, based in Vancouver, Canada. At the Vancouver Coastal Health Research Institute, also in Vancouver. And we also have our research done independently at third-party labs based in the US and in other countries in the world. So it is very real. And it's very, very exciting. But this didn't happen overnight. Sylvanex almost never came to be. We almost scrapped it. And it's very interesting because when we're doing this research and looking at whether we could find a combination of one cannabinoid with silver, because I wanted a nice clean formula that only required one individual cannabinoid, it didn't work. We got great results against MRSA. But then we went, okay, if this is going to make an impact and actually save lives in hospitals, it's got to be effective across the board against everything. And no matter what we did, the combination of one cannabinoid with silver just did not do the trick. Our publication is actually coming out in about a month's time to publish the science and the discovery. But it was just on a whim that I decided, okay, it's obvious one cannabinoid is not going to work. Let's start using triple combinations. And lo and behold, silver plus CBC and CBG in triple combination did the job. And absolutely no other triple combinations worked either. So it's a very distinct, very unique effect of these specific 3 ingredients. And we have 3 independent patent families protecting the technology. And we have coverage in virtually every major market around the world.
That's awesome. That's really important. I was going to ask, actually, how did you land on those 2? Because from what I understand, there are quite many cannabinoids that you could kind of pull in. So how did you ultimately find those 2? And did you even consider, I don't know, adding a 4th? Is there any sort of, benefit there? It sounds like you're not.
Well, yeah. So the short answer is years. Okay. A lot of time and resource into testing all possible combinations against all number of different bacteria. And as you can imagine, you're absolutely right. There are a great number of cannabinoids to test. So we have been doing this for 9 years. And during that time, we've truly had an opportunity to screen, everything possible in the realm of cannabinoids that could work. And lo and behold, Sylvanex is the winner.
So again, that's great to see that kind of coming through development. Are you looking to new, cannabinoid combinations, or do you have your eye on sort of something new to kind of add into the mix as well? Just given that I think there is so much more interest in cannabinoids, cannabis for kind of medical applications, whether again, that's more kind of traditional or kind of more, I guess, more standard in some way, more familiar, I think, to people in terms of just a common use, not just cannabis for the effects.
Well, for our infection control program, where we're advancing a drug and medical device candidates as hospital wound dressings, we are going with the Sylvanex formulation. We are not going to change it, and we're not looking to incorporate other cannabinoids because we've already
done it.
Done it.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. If you crack the code, I guess why continue to change it? I guess ultimately that makes sense. All right. Well, then, in terms of looking ahead for the future for the company, as we're getting through 2025 and beyond, what's sort of the vision, the goal, the things that you want to focus on, and would love people to know kind of about the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking to get our lead Sylvanex topical drug into clinical trials next year. And we're aiming to take it through to phase 2 trials, where we've proven that this technology can protect people in hospitals and prevent infections. At that time, we'll be looking to engage in partnerships with the industry, either a out license or acquisition deal, something of that nature. When it comes to our Sylvanex technology for hospital wound care, we are already partnered with a major multinational firm that specializes in hospital wound care. So we're very excited to be working with them to get the products approved. Because they're regulated as medical devices, they're actually much faster and less expensive to develop and to get approved compared to drugs. Okay. Our drugs for cancer are longer term assets in development in our pipeline. And we have the same aspiration and goal for the cancer drugs. We want to take them through to phase 2 trials to prove their efficacy and safety in the clinic, and then look to engage in acquisition or license opportunities with industry.
Yep. No, I think that makes sense. I know we had kind of breezed past a little bit. I know we'd spent a lot of time on Sylvanex, which again, I think is fantastic to highlight and dig into a little bit, but did want to just briefly touch on sort of the cancer elements there. What is it addressing? How does it sort of benefit? What's sort of the niche that it's fitting into on kind of that side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we've been studying how cannabinoids can address cancer for years, and we focus specifically on breast cancer. There's been really great research done all over the world, actually, and in particular out of Spain at Professor Cristina Sanchez's lab that really highlighted how cannabinoids can effectively treat breast cancer in preclinical studies. So we built upon a lot of the world-class research that had already been published. And what we found was we can address breast cancer with a lead cannabinoid formulation that we have optimized. And we are developing it to treat stage 0 breast cancer. Not many people are aware of stage 0 breast cancer, but it actually makes up 25% of all cases of breast cancer. And breast cancer is the most common form of cancer in the world, according to the World Health Organization. Over 2 million cases diagnosed each year. So for patients that get diagnosed with stage 0 breast cancer, they're actually told they need to have invasive surgery. That's the only mainstream treatment. Currently, there are no FDA-approved therapies for stage 0 cancer. So we've actually shown that we can get stage 0 breast cancer to regress completely in preclinical studies where we're working with real human breast tumors that you can actually visually see in a research model. So we're very, very excited about the results that we're seeing. Again, we are in preclinical stage, but we are addressing this indication by developing the drug as a localized treatment. So the cannabinoids are actually formulated in a novel drug delivery system that allows us to target the breast tumors locally through a form of direct administration. So we believe that this particular formula has huge potential to address one of the most common types of breast cancer and a highly underserved market where there just are no other treatments.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think to give people, more tools as they go along. And I think while it sounds scary, like you're saying that I think you said 25% are stage 0. I think it's actually probably a more encouraging step than you think, just because you want to find that disease way earlier on, so you can find that treatment rather than finding it in stage 3, stage 4, obviously where it's a lot harder to address it. So I would imagine that's also probably an expanding number, a patient group, as our technology gets better, is able to screen and identify and find those things faster. So that's super interesting sorry, seeing some comments which are coming in. I think people are also seeing ways that they have used cannabis for, I think medical stuff, aches and pains. It's interesting. All right, well, that's fantastic again to see how that comes through in development. And then did you mention timeline in terms of where you're thinking that development will come through? I know it's earlier stages, but.
Yeah, they are longer term assets in our pipeline, okay, but we're targeting dosing our first patient in about 2 years' time. So we still have some manufacturing and preclinical safety and toxicology that we need to get through. But we're very, very excited to be advancing these treatments forward.
I think that's great. And again, I think definitely needed, I think, ultimately. So again, giving people new tools and I think just evolving the science based on the research to be able to treat that is fantastic. All right, well, I feel like we've covered a ton, and I feel like it's been a great kind of table set in terms of understanding what you guys are working on and doing. Anything that we missed or didn't cover? And then if not, what would you, again, point people to kind of stay in tune and in touch if they want to learn more ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot, solving antimicrobial resistance and cancer. But, we're really aiming to address the greatest challenges in human health of our time. And it's really incredible that we can be leveraging cannabinoids that we know have a very, very high level of safety. So we believe that our products have massive potential, not only in the marketplace, but to really address the greatest unmet needs of our time in terms of healthcare. So it's very exciting, and we do have a large following You can subscribe to our contact page on our website, andira.ca. And we do send out updates, news releases, so you can follow along and stay in touch with us there.
That sounds great. And then again, I will also mention for anyone who is coming to Benzinga in Chicago in the coming month, would definitely recommend, it sounds like you're doing a panel there, which should be great. If you want to learn more and kind of, stay in touch and in tune for anyone who happens to be attending Benzinga. But yeah, ultimately, I think the virtual options are great to kind of stay in tune over the long term. So I think that's fantastic. Dana, thanks so much. Again, really, really appreciate it. Everyone, thanks for joining. Hopefully you found this informative and can follow up and stay in tune with everything going on at Andira Pharmaceuticals. All right, with all that said, thanks so much, and we will catch you next time. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.